The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Dr. Irwyn Ince is a pastor at Grace DC Presbyterian Church and director of the Grace DC Institute for Cross-Cultural Mission. He's also the author of The Beautiful Community, Unity, Diversity, and the Church at its Best. There's a kind of critique, all too rare these days, that grows out of hope, out of love, even affection for the people you criticize. Irwyn Ince offers that kind of critique for the American church with regard to race. Tim Keller has said, I recognize in Irwyn's voice so much honesty, wisdom, and compassion. You're about to hear that honesty, wisdom, and compassion in this lovely conversation I had with Dr. Irwyn Ince. Irwyn Ince, thank you so much for making time to be on the Habit Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan.
I just finished reading your new book, The Beautiful Community, Unity, Diversity, and the Church at its Best. And it did me a lot of good. Thank you for writing that book, and for it's a gift to the church, and I appreciate it.
I'm grateful. I really am for the response it's been getting.
Yeah.
When you write a book, you don't necessarily know how it's going to be received.
Yeah.
So I've been grateful that people are finding it beneficial to them as they try to think through and engage these issues.
Yeah, you talk about so much of what you have to say centers around the idea of beauty, right? It's certainly in the first half of the book where you're sort of laying the foundation for what you're up to, I want to talk about that a little bit. How did you land on beauty as being central to your way of talking about diversity in the church?
Yeah. Well, I have had a passion for what I would call the ministry of reconciliation in the local church, really from the beginning of my sense of call to pastoral ministry. But I wasn't thinking about it in terms of beauty at that time. It's only been probably in the last 5 or so years, maybe even a little bit less than that I've been captivated by the notion of beauty and the reality that God is beautiful, and to start to look and see, well, how do we see beauty described for us? In the scriptures, what are the parallels here? And then the reality that that beauty calls us to embrace mystery, right?
Yeah.
Mystery and transcendence that has its roots in God, right? And so you can't really quantify beauty. We can describe it, right? I try in my book to kind of give some parameters, some facets of beauty, right? But each of them have a mystery to them, which points us to God as the source of all.
Yeah.
And then him being beautiful and his beauty being seen in the fact that he is beautiful community, right?
Right. And as the Trinity, as the unity and diversity, and
yes, exactly.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think is so important about beauty is it does something to you, right?
Yes.
It's outside of you and it pulls you out of yourself.
Yes, that's right.
Like what? And I can't remember who I'm paraphrasing here, but somebody's talked about the idea of you got, that triad of truth, goodness, and beauty. When it comes to truth, I conform myself, to truth, or, I have some sort of accountability to truth, and I have goodness, is something that I try to conform myself to, but beauty just happens to you,
Yes.
And it pulls it. You say this somewhere in your book, I think, that the idea that, beauty, the pleasure of beauty is decentered delight in another.
Yes.
And that it just the fact that it pulls us out of ourselves, I think, is so incredibly important. And I know there are people, and it's not that uncommon, people, see beauty and want to possess it. But ultimately, it's unpossessable, right?
Unpossessable. That's exactly right. There's a magnetism to beauty. We are drawn to it, pulled to it, right? When we hear, I think it's Psalm 27, when David talks about, one thing have I desired that I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord all the days of my life, and to inquire in his temple. Right? He's talking about this delighting in the Lord. He's not at the center, right? To gaze upon the beauty of the Lord.
Yeah.
All the days of my life.
Yeah.
There I'll be satisfied with that. That drawing us in. Yeah.
Yeah. And, and you have to be a human being, or you have to be, I guess you have to have a soul to appreciate beauty, right? I mean, a lion can't say, that's a beautiful gazelle. He can only say that gazelle looks delicious, I mean, and again, a lion's only relationship to a gazelle is I want to possess that thing and eat it.
That's great. That's right. Exactly right. You don't see the lion just pontificating on the beauty of the gazelle's leap. Right.
That's right. Yeah. That leap that we think is so beautiful to the lion is an inconvenience, right?
Right. That's exactly. Which to the point, and I make this point in our book, right, that beauty is not about utility.
Yes.
It's not about what is just useful. Right?
Yeah.
And that's why you find this reality, that the reality of human sin is that we want to possess, right? We want to own, right?
Yeah.
We want to center ourselves. And beauty is not something we, quote unquote, can own and possess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so this is why, for example, when you look at the civil rights movement and post-civil rights, you would hear African Americans use this term, Black is beautiful. Right? It became part of what African Americans would say.
Yeah.
And I argue that it's not because that in the history of America, the primary message had been that Black was ugly, but that Black was useful.
Oh man, that is great, Irwyn.
Right, that it was about enslavement, usefulness, right, for economic purposes.
Yes,
right, and that's about possession. Right, and beauty is not about possession. Right, so that's even a declaration of liberty to say, Black is beautiful.
Oh, that's so good, because I guess I have thought of that slogan, "Black is Beautiful." I mean, kind of as a slogan, I mean, as a, hey, everybody, remember, we're all, I hadn't taken it as seriously as I should have taken it.
Well, I just say, my point is like, well, where does that heart cry come from?
Yeah.
What's right? It's related to the reality of the image of God, but I posit that it's rooted in this pushing back against a message not of aesthetic displeasing pleasure and looking at Black people, but out of a message that says Blackness in America has only been about utility.
Yeah.
And this for goals.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. That's great. And the inutility of beauty is a clue to how important it is. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's if everything is a means to an end, obviously the end is the more important thing than the means. And by saying beauty is not a means to anything.
Yes, that's right.
We're saying it must be important.
It must be maybe of primary importance.
Yeah.
We might even say we exist in many respects when we talk. I mean, the words that the Scripture uses, not just beauty, but things like glory, majesty, awe, right, wonder. Those words, right, get us into a mind that says, oh, well, what's the end? Well, glory now. Yes, glory's coming, but we're seeking to honor, glorify God now. We acknowledge and recognize His majesty now. He dwells in His radiance, right? He dwells in unapproachable light. All of these realities that are not just about an end. These are things that are just true.
Yeah. This is a podcast about writing, right? And so I'm going to try to direct, I mean, these big ideas, big theological ideas, I don't want to reduce them down, right, to these are writing tips, but I think we're sort of direct toward, I mean, what do these big ideas, how can they shape the way people think about writing? And so, except I still have to, I just want to say one thing I love about what you're doing of talking about the beautiful community is, again, as I said a minute ago, goodness and truth are, I guess what you remind us that there's pleasure in diversity, right? That it's not just, hey, everybody, the right thing to do here is to embrace diversity, which of course it is, diversity and equality. But there's a joy here and a pleasure.
Yes.
And
that's right.
And I think that delight that you talk about is such an important motivator for the work we do, whether that's creative work or other kinds or ministry work or plumbing,
Yes. Right. That's right. That sense of delight. I mean, it's really interesting, right? When the Scriptures talk about, particularly in Ecclesiastes, I'm going to paraphrase here, but right, talks about finding joy or contentment or delight. I'm going to get the word, in our toil under the sun.
Yeah.
Right. The preacher says, right, that there should be a sense of delight in what we do, right? Finding a sense of contentment and pleasure in our work. And it's interesting how it contrasts. It calls it our toil under the sun, right?
Yeah.
Which doesn't give you a sense of delight, right? It gives you in that sense of this being hard, it's hot, you're under the sun, but a pleasure there in the work that we do, right? Right. That's the Lord is pleased for us to be pleased.
Yeah.
He gives us to do.
Yeah.
Or he calls us to do, I might say.
Yeah. Now, but having said that, you also acknowledge that it is, and you're borrowing this term from MLK, if I'm not mistaken, it's divine dissatisfaction that moves you to do a lot of what you do, both in your ministry work and in writing this book.
Yeah.
So that feels like a contradiction.
Yes.
Delight and divine dissatisfaction. Which is it?
It's yes. So the divine dissatisfaction, that phrase that I borrowed from Dr. King when he encourages, this is in a 1965 speech at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. He encouraged his hearers to go out with a divine dissatisfaction. That is, what do you see in the world, in the church, that is out of accord with God's standard and his word? Mm-hmm. And God himself gives you a divine dissatisfaction to engage these issues. So you might be motivated to say, I see this issue and problem, and I see what God's heart is. So I want to press into how things ought to be as God declares it to us.
Yeah.
But there's also a delight in that pursuit, right? There's a sense of joy in God's calling, in responding to God's calling, in being engaged in God's calling. It doesn't mean that it's easy. It doesn't mean that there's no discouragement. It doesn't mean that there's no difficulty or hardship. But those things are not necessarily antithetical to joy and delight. Right? So it really is a both and. Yes, there's a day coming when will be no more divine dissatisfaction. When all will be delight and everything will be as it ought to be. When there will be shalom permeating the cosmos. But right now we live in this tension, right, of the reality of things that move us to a divine dissatisfaction. But also a sense of contentment and delight and peace in engaging it because God has called us to it.
Yeah, I love it. I talk to writers a lot about the idea of telling a truer story than the story the world is telling about itself and about us.
Right.
And that, or a related idea that I think is really relevant to the way you're talking about in your work as a minister and as a writer is, there's true things and truer things and truest things. And so the brokenness in the world around us, whether that's racial brokenness or just all the kinds of brokenness around us, that's all true. And there's no reason to pretend it's not true. But there's something truer.
Yes.
And
absolutely. And we this is the blessing, right? I don't want to start preaching here, but here's one of the things we see, right? What is in the last book in the Bible, Revelation, right? That's this truer and true things and truer things, you might say, is what that book is about. It's Revelation. John, the curtains are pulled back for John while he's on the island of Patmos to see the truest things. To see, like, as the churches are suffering, dealing with persecution, as it seems like evil is winning the day, right? The Lord says, "Look, let me show you." He says, "Let me show you the bride. Let me show you the wife of the Lamb. Let you see her glory and her radiance and her beauty as she reflects right? The glory and the beauty of her Lord. Right? That this is what the church looks like. Right? This is what God's people look like. This is what they are. You need to see it. Right?
Yeah.
And so this is we have that same kind of calling. This is one of the things that the Spirit of God does. He gives us the eyes to see the things that our senses can't perceive.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. In the end of sermon, I'll stop.
Well, I appreciate your telling a truer story, right? I mean, that's what's going on in this book. And so, yeah, thanks. Okay. I don't have statistics. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure that my listenership of the Habit podcast is overwhelmingly white people. Okay.
Yeah.
And I hope a lot of them are interested in, telling a truer story about matters of race and justice and some, but can you sort of talk a little bit about ways that white folks who are writers or, and I don't know, I'm always, I'm afraid I'm going to be using some language that's somehow outdated, but can be allies or can be just be brothers and sisters to people of color. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Let's talk about that. Particularly in this day and age, in this time, when the conversation around race and justice, reconciliation, is just it's in bold relief before us in the church and in the culture. And so, to my white brothers and sisters, I think one of the realities, at least among those who I think have done the better job of engaging this, is going on a learning journey yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So recognizing that as you enter into this conversation, it's not that you have nothing to offer, but before offering something,
mm-hmm.
there needs to be a willingness to hear, to listen, right? To be slow to speak and quick to listen.
Yeah.
To the voices of African Americans and maybe other people of color, their lived experiences, how they think through these issues, right? So if you've never read African Americans who've written on this subject, particularly from a Christian perspective, brothers and sisters in Christ. I'm not saying limited to that, but brothers and sisters in Christ, who engage these issues, who speak on these issues, who preach about these issues, then there'll be a deficit in your perspective when you speak into these issues, because you will not have been able to give serious consideration to the lived and expressed experiences of African Americans. Because here's the thing, right? This is not new for the majority African American church. Let's just talk about the church.
Yeah.
This is not a new conversation.
Uh-huh.
It's not a new engagement.
Yeah.
It is one that has been there from the beginning of the Black church in America.
Yeah.
That press into these issues. And there have always been what you might say call white allies.
Mm-hmm.
in these along the way. But that has very regularly taken the shape of something that's more patronizing.
Yeah.
So
Let me lend my authority and my influence to your
that's exactly right.
project or whatever. Yeah.
For example, read the wonderful new biography on Frederick Douglass by, I think it's David Blight, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom, talking about Douglass's escape from slavery and how he was a spokesman for, the abolitionist anti-slavery movement. But he was also used by that movement, and he expresses his own frustrations by being kind of managed by his, by his white managers, of his messaging, and the like. Mm-hmm. So that coming under the listening influence, of people of color, before you begin kind of engaging and pontificating on these issues. I have a very good friend who's a pastor of a historic African-American church here in DC, and we have these conversations. Their church has added, and this is church is almost 120 years old. So it is a fixture here in DC. Yeah. And they have included intentional reconciliation in their core values now. Uh-huh. But when we talk, he will share with me the perspective. He says, yes, but it takes me a while before I trust that my white brothers and sisters are genuine, in that they come into the table with a listening posture and not one that is initially suspect, of my theology, suspect of, my ability or our ability to take the lead in these kinds of engagements. So that's just a necessary part of this. And the wonderful thing is that there's ample resources. There's no lack of engage here.
But I think there is a lack of white folks' willingness to be under the authority, or if that's the right word for. I mean, that's definitely a right word, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, sure. And I think you touch on this in your book, that even in multiracial churches, if white folks don't do too well, not feeling like they're in charge. Sometimes.
That's right. So that's right. So that the research bears out that even in multiracial churches, white cultural normativity remains the dominant, quote unquote, cultural ethos of the church. Yeah. And that's based on historical realities of where we are, right? If you are in a different country, there are different problems, right? But if the majority of the people are not European, there's a different dynamic in the church context. So cultural normativity is a real thing wherever you are. It's just that here, as we start to pursue diversity, white cultural norms become the most dominant ethos. And so taking that position of a learner who wants to listen well before speaking, and recognizing this. Here's the other thing. The other thing is that there has to be a willingness to be roundly criticized by some segments of the white evangelical community. No white Christian who engages these issues forthrightly, who takes these kinds of listening postures and can express, right? Can express the experiences and can offer ways of moving into this that include kind of dying to self, will be free of critique, free from the accusation that you're beginning to abandon the gospel for a socialist agenda. I mean, it's just, especially in today's Twitterverse, will happen.
Yeah. What's the term you use? Cultural normativity? Is that what you said?
Yeah, white cultural normativity. Yes,
white cultural normativity. Yeah. That's such a helpful thing to bear in mind. I mean, the ability, and now I'm again narrowing this down a little bit down to writerliness, but the ability to see, to step outside yourself enough to see kind of where you're coming from, it is so important for any of us, but also especially people who write, yes. Right? To be able to examine, have some sort of self-awareness that what I'm calling normal isn't universal, right?
Right. Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, you say, you talk about ghettoization. You use it in a way that people don't usually use it. Actually, can you tell me what you mean by ghettoization? And because you said it started at the Tower of Babel, right?
That's right. I don't mean by a densely populated urban context characterized by blight and poverty.
Yeah.
I mean the groups to which we belong that are divided, are segmented, separated from other groups that start at biblically speaking, at the Tower of Babel, when I say that's the last time humanity was one big happy family. Right? It's how it's described in verse 1 of Genesis chapter 11. But our unity was our unity in absolute abject rebellion against God. God had said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. Humanity had said, no, thank you. We'll find ourselves a plain and a land. We'll build ourselves a city and a tower, make a great name for ourselves. God comes down and confuses our language, which, right, they leave the building project undone. Yeah. And they can no longer understand each other. So I find our roots of our discontent, so to speak, there. Yeah. So from that point, I get my sense of humanity and what it means to be a person and what it means to be people from my group, my tribe, my ghetto. And therefore, I am naturally hostile. We are naturally, at the very least, suspicious of people from a different ghetto. We don't naturally say, let's appreciate the beauty, God's creative genius in our fellow image bearers who come from this cultural context and what beauty they bring to the table and how that enhances our understanding of what it means to be human. Right? Yeah. We say, no. If you really want to be human, you just become like us. Do things our way, because we know the right way. Yeah. Right. And so, as you say, we have no idea the depths to which our expectations, desires, preferences, and predilections are informed by our ghetto. When your ghetto is the norm, your default position is to expect others to conform to your way of being. And so, to return to my previous question, I think people of color are maybe a little more aware of this truth than white people like me, who think
my ghetto is the norm, or my ghetto is the world.
There's truth there. I want to nuance it a bit.
Okay, great. That's why I've got you here to provide the nuance
and say this reality of our cultural norms, just being the water that we swim in, and as unexamined rules and ways of being and understandings of life is true for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's not something that African Americans say, oh, well, I understand, our cultural norms and why they happen, right? A lot of times they're unexamined. Now, what happens is when the dominant culture, the majority culture, those norms are not examined as much because there's no need to navigate in non-majority culture context.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
I'm not code switching as much as you are to get through my day.
As an African American, you've got to navigate in majority white cultural context. So you can see those differences and distinctions. There are things that you can value and appreciate from your own culture. And then you say, okay, here's what I have to know and do in this context.
Yeah.
If I'm going to thrive, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm a part of a white majority culture, I don't really have to do that. Right. I do not have to do that to thrive in the United States of America. I don't. Right. And so
you're saying, when you say I, you mean if you're a white person?
I'm aware. Yes. Right. Yes. Right. Yes. Thank you for that clarification. Right. But my white brothers and sisters do not have to engage in different cultural contexts, different cultural norms, if they're going to thrive and flourish in this society. Yeah. And so it's more of this gets to the notion of the term privilege. Mm-hmm. That's an aspect of privilege. It doesn't mean, that I'm going to be, that I, as a white person, am always going to be rich and successful and have no struggle. Right? It relates to I have the privilege of not having to engage in a different cultural context with different norms and rules that I have to understand if I'm going to thrive. I don't have to do that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. If I don't thrive, it has nothing to do with that.
It has nothing to do with that. There might be other reasons why I don't thrive, but it has nothing to do with that. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Well, we're about to run out of time. I just wanted to highlight something that I appreciate you saying, which is your advice to, I started to say to white folks, I guess it's really to everybody. Embrace being more curious than confident in manners of diversity and difference.
Right.
And I think that is that's what we need bumper stickers of.
Yes, more curious than confident in matters of diversity. Just think about this, not even from a human perspective. Think about it from the vantage point of seeing the diversity in creation. When I look at different flowers, right, or plants, or when I sit and listen to and see different birds, I don't have a sense of confidence. I get why this flower is this color and does this, and why these birds sing their song this way or that. Like, there's curiosity there.
Yeah.
And so particularly the same thing when it comes to humanity, right? We all have, as to go back to what you pointed out earlier from what I wrote, right? We very rarely probe the depths of the ways in which our outlook on life, the way we think about what is good and true and beautiful, is shaped and formed by our ghetto, by our cultural realities and contexts.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that's true, that means I have to have a curiosity about those values, those unspoken values that exists below the surface of the water from the things that I see.
Yeah.
With fellow image bearers who are different than I am, because that's the thing, right? We are all image bearers.
Yeah.
And we are made to reflect the beauty of the Lord in our diverse, beautiful community. So that should engender in me a curiosity of discovering the beauty.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. And so where confidence displaces curiosity, there's a kind of blindness.
Sure. Yes. And I should say, there are some things that I can be confident in.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not to say that I don't have any confidence.
Yeah.
At a basic level, I certainly have confidence that I'm engaging with a fellow image bearer who has comparable dignity and value because of that truth. I can have confidence in what God says in His Word that is true, right?
Yeah.
That about my salvation in Jesus Christ, about what God intends to do with humanity and His world.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of our engagement with one another and our relational pursuit of loving our neighbors, right? Because I can be confident that we're to love God with everything and our neighbors as ourselves. I have confidence there. Yeah. But in the how do we love our neighbors well?
Mm-hmm.
That's where the curiosity comes in.
Yeah.
Those lines are different.
None of those kinds of confidence you just named would displace curiosity, right? They would all engender curiosity about your fellow image bearers. That's good. All right, we got to wrap this up. So I got to ask you my last question that I always ask. Who are the writers who make you want to write, Irwyn?
Yes. Let's think about various categories.
Okay.
Theologically, I am informed by people like Herman Bavinck. I don't aspire to write poems and volumes, but his ability to grasp and to tease out the implications of Scripture, even if I'm going to have places of disagreement, right? But inspire me to be thoughtful and creative in my own writing. As I think about their particular writers and journalists, I think about Isabel Wilkerson, an African-American journalist and author. Her book, the storyteller, her book, The Warmth of Other Suns, her new book, Cast, the Origins of Our Discontent, I think is the subtitle. I'm inspired by the way that she writes.
She's amazing, isn't she?
Amazing. Another one who really, he's a novelist, Colson Whitehead. Read his novel, The Nickel Boys, last year. His other story, The Underground Railroad. Yeah. These are fictional stories, but they inspire me creatively. Mm-hmm. And I'll mention two more.
Okay.
Esther Lightcap Meek, who's a professor at, I think, Grove City College in Pennsylvania. Just her depth of thought in a book like Loving to Know, A Covenant Epistemology. She's a teacher, a professor of philosophy. She influenced me even reading how she writes about beauty. And then last one, who hasn't really written a book, she's more of her name is Alyssa Yukiko Whitebrock. She's a professor at Covenant College out in Georgia. And so more about hearing her speak as she brings the reality of art history to bear on all kinds of subjects. So whenever she writes something, I read it. and I'm inspired by them. And lastly, I'll say my son, Nabil, who is an artist, a musician, but the lyrics that he writes, I mean, I've learned from him, as a matter of fact, my second born son. So there you go.
Yeah. And his name, his hip hop name is
So Chill. SEAUX. Chill.
Yeah. I remember I saw that in your book, and I loved what you had put in there from him.
Yeah.
In your book. So, all right, Irwyn Ince, this has just been a delight. I've been so happy to get to know you a little bit, and I hope we can talk again soon.
Yeah, likewise, Jonathan. Thank you so much for the time and the invitation.
The Rabbit Room has partnered with Lipscomb University to make this podcast possible. Lipscomb has graciously given us access to their recording studio in the Center for Entertainment and Arts building. We're so grateful for their sponsorship, their encouragement, and the good work they do in Nashville. Special shout out as well to Jess Ray for letting us use her song Too Good as part of this podcast. Visit jessraymusic.com to hear more of her beautiful songs.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
This podcast was produced by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. All our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.